Amy from the King Arthur Baking Company, and welcome to the Bake for Good program. In this program, you're going to learn to make bread from scratch. We have 3 goals: learn, bake, and share. You're going to learn the math and science of bread making. You're going to get to bake the recipe yourself, either at home or in class. And then we ask that you share half of what you bake with someone in need or as an act of kindness. We're going to cover some basic baking and bread making skills, such as reading a recipe, measuring accurately, mixing, kneading, shaping, and then baking your bread. This video is divided into sections, but I suggest that you watch the video all the way through the first time, and then you can go back and move through the sections as you need. In addition to this video, there are lots of resources on our website, kingarthurbaking.com. And when you're ready, we can get started. All right, so we're getting ready to bake. The first thing that you want to do is to wash your hands. I have tons of great tools and equipment here, but your clean hands are the best tool you're ever going to have. You should also pull your hair back so it doesn't fall into your bread dough, and take anything off your hands, like any watches or rings that you might have. If you have an apron, go ahead and put one on. I like to wear an apron because I get really messy. If you don't have an apron, you can just wear a clean shirt you don't mind getting some flour on. The other thing that you want to do to get ready is to set out all of your ingredients and all of the tools you're going to need to make your bread. You know what to get out by reading your recipe. So one of the supplies that you're going to be getting is this recipe booklet. It has a lot of great information in it, including the recipe to this bread. Now, a recipe is not just the list of ingredients, but it's all the instructions that tell you what you're going to do with those ingredients. And whether you're making this recipe or another, I always want you to read your recipe all the way through 2 times before you begin. You really want to understand all of the steps involved. If you don't read ahead, you might get halfway through here and realize that you forgot an ingredient, or maybe you forgot to turn the oven on. One thing that a recipe also tells you is how long it takes to make. And so you'll know from start to finish, this recipe takes 3.5 hours to make. Okay, let me show you some of the other things that you're going to be getting in your supplies. You're going to be getting 2 bags of flour. We have all-purpose flour and white whole wheat flour. You're going to get a dough scraper. This is a really handy tool, and we're going to use it a lot. You're going to find a bread bag and a twist tie. This is for you to put your bread in that you're going to be sharing. And the last thing you're going to find is this. And so this is a packet of yeast. Yeast is what makes our bread rise. Yeast is a single-celled living organism. We can call it a microorganism, and it's alive inside our packet, but right now it's dormant. So the first thing that we need to do is actually to wake our yeast up. So we're going to think about the start of our recipe as creating an environment for our yeast where it can wake up and start to grow. It needs 3 things in that environment. It needs warmth, moisture, and food. So that's how we begin. I have 2 cups of warm water here. This is my warmth and moisture. And you might be wondering, what does warm really mean? You can check your water temperature by taking your clean hand and putting it right into your water. It should feel nice and warm. If this water was hot, so hot that you have to take your hand out right away, then it's too hot for your yeast. And really hot water that's close to boiling will kill your yeast, and then your bread won't work. Likewise, if it's really cold, it'll take a long time for your yeast to wake up. So simply put your hand in there, and it should feel nice and comfortable, and your yeast will be fine. So we have our warmth and moisture. The next thing we need to do is feed our yeast. So we need some food. Like us, yeast loves sugar. So we're going to be adding a 1/4 cup of sugar to our bowl. Now, for our sugar, we are going to be using a dry measuring cup, which is not the same as a liquid measuring cup. Our liquid cup has lots of different lines. You can measure many different amounts with 1 cup, and it has a spout for easy pouring. Our dry measuring cup is flat across the top, and you measure just the 1 amount indicated on the cup. And here's what we're going to do. I want you to take your measuring cup, your 1/4 cup, and scoop way, way down into your sugar until it's overflowing. You've put too much in. You're going to grab your dough scraper, the straight edge, start at the handle, and just sweep across the top. That's going to give you a nice, accurate measurement. We can go ahead and add that. At this point in our recipe, we're going to be very precise with our measurements. Accurately measuring is one thing that you can do to best ensure that your baking product will be successful. All right, so we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to stir this in. We want to dissolve the sugar into our water. When we do that, we're creating a solution. I know my sugar is dissolved when I can't see it anymore and I kind of can't hear that crunch anymore. All right, I think that's good enough. We can go ahead and we're going to open our yeast packet. These packets are pretty thick and they're not going to tear very easily. So go ahead and grab a pair of scissors, and I like to cut right across the top like that. I'm going to pour our yeast in and give it a stir. So this is a time where we're going to engage some of our other senses into making our bread. One thing that you're going to notice is that your water is going to turn kind of brown and murky. That's great. The other thing that I hope you notice is that you're going to have a really nice smell coming from your bowl. Some people like the smell of yeast. It reminds them of freshly baked bread. Some people don't like it so much, but you're definitely going to notice something. All right? So that's great. So we're going to go ahead now and we're going to add the first of our 2 flours. So that is this flour, which is our white whole wheat flour, and this is a whole grain. If you look at this diagram of a wheat berry, there are 3 parts. When we use the center part, just the white part, we're making white flour, all-purpose flour like this. When we use a whole grain or make whole grain flour, we use all 3 parts of the berry. And it's in those 2 additional parts, the bran and the germ, that actually have about 80% of the nutritional value that flour has to give us. So if you ever have a choice to use whole grains, I think it's a good thing you can do for your health. All right, so I told you we were going to be using different techniques to measure different ingredients. There's a certain way that we want to measure our flour so we get that accurate measurement that we're talking about. I'm going to take my flour and I'm not going to scoop out like I did with my sugar. Instead, I'm going to take the whole thing and I'm going to dump it into another bowl that I can get at really easily. And now I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to fluff, sprinkle, and sweep. What does that mean? It means I'm going to take a spoon, a fork, a whisk, a scoop, whatever you have at home, and I want you to stir up your flour until it feels nice and loose. We're getting it nice and fluffy. In the bag or in your flour bin, your flour can get really compressed. So give it a good stir and a fluff. Once it feels nice and loose, go ahead and grab your measuring cup, and I want you to sprinkle it into your cup. You want it to stay nice and fluffy. Just like you did with the sugar overflowing. You're making sure you've got all parts of that measuring cup full. Grab your dough scraper, start at the handle, and sweep across. All right? Fluff, sprinkle, sweep. We are going to measure 3 cups. 2 are going to go into our bowl. 1 is going to sit out for right now. So there's our first cup. When we measure with a measuring cup, we're measuring the amount of space that that flour takes up. We're measuring by volume. And that's a great way to measure your ingredients. Another way you can measure your ingredients is by weight. And if you have a kitchen scale at home, we've included the weight measurements in the recipe for you. So that's our second cup. And now here's our third. So remember, this one I'm just going to leave out for right now, and I'll explain why in just a minute. All right. I'm going to grab my spoon, and now I'm just going to start to mix this until it's combined. So just stir it until you don't have any dry flour left. After you have all of your flour incorporated, I just want you to let your bowl to sit for a moment. Here's what we hope is happening inside our bowl. Those yeast cells have gotten into that warm water. They're starting to wake up and come out of their dormancy. And they're starting to get active. And as they get active, they're going to need to eat something. So they're going to start to eat the sugar that we put into the bowl. As a single-celled organism, it's going to absorb the sugar through the cell wall. As it starts to do this, it's going to start to give off a gas. It's the same gas that we give off when we exhale. We inhale oxygen and we exhale carbon dioxide. Knowing that our yeast does this is a great way for us to test our recipe here to make sure that everything is working. Because if I know that yeast should be giving off carbon dioxide, when I look closely at my bowl, I should be able to see bubbles starting to appear. And you can see I'm getting some good bubbles here. They're small. It's like carbonation. They're tiny bubbles. You may have a lot or you may have a few. As long as you have some, you're fine. If you don't have any, just stop stirring your bowl. You could have been really enthusiastic and you broke those bubbles up. And as long as your water was not so hot that you've killed your yeast, not so cold that it's still asleep, and you actually remember to put the yeast in the bowl, you're going to be in great shape. All right. I kept that extra cup of flour out because I wanted you to be able to see our carbon dioxide bubbles, but I can go ahead and add that now. So that's 3 cups of white whole wheat flour. I'm going to mix this in, and now I'm going to add our next 2 ingredients, which is vegetable oil and salt. So I'm going to measure 1/4 cup of vegetable oil. It's a liquid, so I'm going to use a liquid cup. Now, the way to get an accurate measurement with a liquid cup is you want to get eye level. So we're going to pour the oil in, and I'm going to get eye level to make sure I'm right at that 1/4 cup. And if you pour too much, go ahead and pour some back into your bottle. That's good. I'm going to add that. And next, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of salt. So with our salt, it's going to be like our sugar method. We're going to scoop to overflowing and level off. These ingredients have some jobs to do in our bread. The oil is going to help our bread to stay soft. We're not making a really hard, crunchy loaf. It's also going to help everything stay fresher longer because it's going to keep our bread from drying out too fast. The salt does a couple of different things. First, it just adds flavor to our bread, which is great. The other thing the salt does is it's going to slow down our yeast. We don't want our yeast to kind of use up its energy and go too fast. We have a long time for it to work, so that's going to help it slow down a little bit. All right, so now everything in our bowl kind of looks like pancake batter. We're doing great. We're going to go ahead and add our last ingredient, and that is this. This is our all-purpose flour. If you do any kind of baking at home, this is probably the flour that you have. So remember, we're not scooping out of the bag, putting it all into another bowl, and we're doing those 3 steps: fluff, sprinkle, and sweep. Give it a nice fluff. And here's my cup. Just like our white whole wheat flour, we're adding 3 cups. And just like before, 2 cups go in and 1 cup stays out. With your leftover flour, there's a couple of ways that you can store it. Your all-purpose flour can go into your pantry or cupboard. You can put it back into your bag, or you can keep it in another container, and it'll be fine for months. Your white whole wheat flour, however, because it's a whole grain, should not be stored in your cupboard or pantry. You actually want to keep it in the freezer. Because if you remember from that wheat diagram, in that little bit of the germ, the center of the berry, there's actually a little bit of oil or fat in there. And if it's left at room temperature for a couple of months, it will actually spoil. But if you keep it in the freezer, it should be fine. All right, so I've got my 2 cups of flour. I'm going to start to mix this in. I tend to get flour all over. That's why I wear an apron. All right. Before, our batter was nice and loose, but now it's starting to look more like dough. It's starting to get really thick and sticky, and very soon my spoon is not going to work anymore. So when I get to the point where my dough is so thick that my spoon is going to stand up straight, I'm ready to go ahead and do my favorite thing, which is to knead my bread dough. Kneading bread dough is one of my favorite things because we're going to get to put our hands in here. But if we put our hands in this dough right now, you can see it's so sticky that it would be a disaster. That's because as we've been making our dough, something has been forming inside our dough, and it's called gluten. So what is gluten? Gluten is made out of proteins in our wheat flour. There are many different proteins in flour. 2 of them are called glutenidin and gliadin, and they're sitting in our flour here, not doing a whole lot. But when we mix them with water and get them wet and start to move them around, those protein strands are going to come together, and they're going to go from this kind of confused, twisted mess into a nice orderly net, a web that's going to catch the carbon dioxide that our yeast is giving off, and it's going to stretch and expand and hold, and that's going to help our bread to rise and hold its shape. So gluten is really helpful. It's the glue that holds everything together. But because it's so sticky, it can be really difficult to work with. But remember, you have this whole cup of flour that's yours to use. Because you can take some of this flour, if you just put a little bit between you and the sticky dough, your hands won't stick to it. I'm now going to take what's here, and I'm going to sprinkle about half of this cup over my sticky dough. We're going to let go of that precise measuring that we were focused on earlier, and now we're going to do more with estimating. We're going to take the dough scraper, and rather than using the straight edge this time, I want to use the curved edge. And if you hold it in your hand like a paddle, you're going to take it and you're going to go around and scrape down the sides of your bowl. I want you to go around a couple of times. You can move yourself, but you can also move the bowl. And what you want to do is get your dough into a big lump in the middle, kind of covered with all that loose flour that you've put in there. As we're doing this, we've actually already started to knead our bread dough. So once I've gone around a few times and I feel that everything has come together, I can go ahead and take my dough and I'm going to tip it away from me so it does not all land on me and put it right onto my table. You don't need a special surface to knead your dough. Your kitchen table, your kitchen counter will be just fine. As long as it's clean and dry, you'll be in great shape. So when everything comes out of the bowl, it can sometimes look like it's a mess. This is actually perfect for kneading. We are going to knead in 3 easy steps. We're going to fold, push, and turn. I want to start by taking a little bit of flour, putting it on either sides of my dough so I can take my hands and get a little flour on them so they won't stick. I'm going to push my dough together and then fold, push, and turn. I start the furthest away from me. I'm going to take that, fold it towards me. Here where the dough comes together, I'm going to put the heel of my hand. My fingers are up and out of the way, and I'm going to push forward. I'm going to take the whole thing, pick it up, turn it a quarter turn, and I'm ready to go again. Fold it towards yourself, push it away, and then turn. And then just keep going. What do you do if your dough starts to stick to you? You can take a little bit of flour, put it on the sides, and get your hands into the flour. You don't want to put flour on top of your dough because it will keep your dough from sticking to itself when it folds. Every once in a while, take your dough, kind of move it to the side. And do you see all these little bits of dough and flour? Don't try to work those into your dough. They will never go in. Take your dough scraper, scrape those right out of the way. Put some fresh flour down, just a little bit, just as much as you need to get the job done, not anymore. Put your dough back and keep going. When we're kneading, we're doing a couple of different things. One is we're adding a little bit more flour to our recipe. There's not as much in here as we're going to eventually want. And we're making gluten. So think of these spirally strands. As we knead, we're stretching those protein strands this way, and then we turn it, and then we're stretching them crossways to make that web. All right? Now, it is more important to do it right than to do it fast. So don't worry about kneading too fast right now. Just take your time and make sure you're doing it well. You're going to knead your dough for about 5 minutes. So you can go ahead and set a timer for 5 minutes. It might seem like a long time, but you're going to start off slow because you're learning something new. So just be patient with yourself, and pretty soon you'll get the knack, and you can go a little bit faster. It's been about 5 minutes. The timer has gone off. You wonder if you've done enough to your dough. There's a couple of ways you can tell. One is it's just not sticking as much, either to you or to your surface. It has a nice, firm feel to it. And when you go to push the dough, do you see how it follows my hand along the board? The dough wants to stay together. When that has happened, go ahead and take your dough, and we're going to put it into a little round circle, and we're just going to let it sit for a moment. This is called a bench rest. A baker's table is called a bench, and we're going to let our dough sit for just a few minutes. In that time, we're going to give a chance for the flour to absorb some more water and everything that we've been working on in there to kind of come together. While it's resting, I'm going to get my bowl ready to put my dough back in. So I do not need to wash this out or clean this out. I'm just going to take that little bit of oil that's left in my measuring cup, put those few drops in there. I'm going to take a paper towel, and I'm just going to rub that around. It's going to keep my dough from sticking. Okay. All right, let's pretend it's been 5 minutes. You're going to come back to your dough, and you're going to knead it again for about another minute or so. In that short bench rest, you're going to find that your dough has gotten smoother and a little bit bouncier. So when your final test for your dough is when you put it all together, and you take 2 fingers and you gently press the sides. Where you press in, the dough is going to bounce back. and the indentation you make with your fingers is going to disappear. The dough is a little bit sticky, not so much that it's staying on my hand, but it feels just a little bit tacky. So I have my bowl. I'm going to pick up my dough. I'm going to use my dough scraper. I'm going to put it in. I'm going to kind of roll it around. That gives my dough a little bit of a coating of oil on it. And now I'm going to cover it. So I'm going to use both plastic wrap that I tuck down around it and a towel. I want to use both. Our dough is now going to rest for an hour and a half. It does not need to be someplace special, just a quiet space. It likes kind of room temperature, so around 70, 72 degrees. You do not need to stay next to your dough for an hour and a half. Please go off and do something else. And when you come back in an hour and a half, we'll check on our dough and see if it's ready. It's been 90 minutes, so we're going to come back and look at our dough. So you're going to notice it has definitely changed. Our dough has risen. It's nice and puffy. It's going to be about twice the size as it was before. So more important than the time is the size of your dough. So when you put your dough in your bowl, just kind of eyeball it, see how much space it takes up, and then in about an hour and a half, it should be about twice the size. Now let's just review. Our dough has risen, but why has it risen? It's risen because the yeast has continued to give off carbon dioxide bubbles. Those bubbles got trapped in that gluten net that we made, and now our dough has expanded, but those bubbles have been trapped. So everything expands, but the carbon dioxide stays in there, and it inflates like a balloon. So if you look at the side of your bowl, if it was glass, you would see all those carbon dioxide bubbles. When we tested our dough before, our dough had a nice bounce to it. But right now, our dough isn't bouncing at all. So we can go ahead and we're going to take our dough out of our bowl. Just gently turn it out onto your counter or your table. We're going to gently press it down. I want you to deflate it in case there's any big carbon dioxide bubbles in there. Just gently press it down just like that. You don't need to punch your dough down. So here's one recipe of dough. One recipe makes 2 loaves. So I'm going to show you how to make a basic loaf and a braid. I'm going to take our dough scraper and we're just going to estimate and divide it in half. I'm going to use the straight edge of the scraper and I can use it to cut through and pull my dough apart. All right. With this half, I'll make the basic loaf. So I'm just going to put that over here for right now. And with this half, I'll make a braid. To make a braid, we need 3 pieces. So once again, I'm just going to estimate and use fractions. So I'm going to divide this into thirds. If I wanted to make sure that each of my dough pieces was exactly the same size, I would weigh them. All right, so 1, 2, and 3. Now, I am sure all of you have rolled out dough at some point, Play-Doh or clay to make a rope. I'm going to show you how a baker does it. I'm going to put just a tiny bit of flour down because my dough is a little bit sticky, but it's just a whisper of flour. I'm going to take my piece of dough, and I want to kind of get it in a ready-to-roll shape. So I'm going to start at any side, and I'm just going to gently fold and kind of roll and tuck my dough up, just like that. Now I have something that looks a little bit like an egg roll. Rather than starting with 2 hands, I want to start with 1. And I'm going to press down in the middle until I get a good size indentation. Then I'm going to put my thumbs together in that dent. My hands are flat and wide, and I'm going to roll my dough out, just like that. I'm just going to make a rope. All right, so that's 1. I'm going to put that over here, let that kind of rest and sit for a bit. And I'll do my second one. Again, if it's a little sticky, I'm using just a tiny bit of flour. I don't want to put too much flour down or my dough will just slide all over. I take it, roll it up, use 1 hand, make a dent, and now 2 hands. When I roll, my hands are flat and wide. They're not tipped to the side. I'm using the full length of my arms to roll out. So there's my second one, and now I'll do my third one. One thing you can shape with this dough, if you wanted to, you could just roll these out and make breadsticks. That's great. I'm making 3 with this half. You could cut them in half and make 6, and they would work out fine. Smother them with garlic butter. When they're done baking, they'll be delicious. All right, I'm rolling out this dough. I'm going to let these 3 strands rest a little bit because I want you to notice what's happening. Do you see how when I pull my dough apart, it wants to come back together? That's the gluten in our dough. The more we try to handle, shape, roll, twist our dough, the tighter and tighter the gluten is going to become. So when it starts to fight you and won't go where you want it to go, I want you just to put it to the side, cover it with a towel or plastic, and just let it sit for a few minutes. When you come back to it, the gluten will have relaxed and you'll be better able to shape your dough. So while those are resting, I'm going to go here to our basic loaf. This is a great loaf of bread to make if you just want to make sandwiches or French toast with your bread. I'm going to take my dough and I'm going to gently press it out so it's kind of a rectangle. It doesn't need to be perfect. I have my smoother, nicer side on the bottom because that's going to be the outside of my loaf. And what I'm going to do is start from the top. I'm going to take the dough, I'm going to fold it about 2/3 down like I'm folding a letter and give it a nice firm press. Now I'm going to start from the bottom and I'm going to fold up, and again, a nice firm press. Now I'm going to take the whole thing and I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm kind of stretching the outside of my loaf. Where my dough comes together, this seam, I want to pinch it closed. I don't want my loaf to split open there while it's baking. All right, and just like I did before with my braid, I'm going to start with one hand in the middle, and then I'm going to go to two hands. And you can roll this out long and thin, short and round, however you like it is just great. Once you've got it where you want it, I want you to find the seam where your bread came together, your dough came together. Turn that over, that's going to be the bottom. You can use your hands to tuck in the edges and make it nice and neat. I have here just a basic baking sheet. You can either use parchment paper or you can put a little bit of oil on it. It'll be fine. I'm going to pick up my loaf with my hands like this, lay it down on my baking sheet, and I might use my hands to shape it again. I might have lost a little bit of my shape. I am now going to cover this, and I can use a towel or I can use the plastic that I had over my dough, and it's going to rest for 30 minutes. All right? My dough is still rising. My yeast is still alive. It's still giving off carbon dioxide. This won't double in size in 30 minutes, but it should be a little bit puffier, a little bit bigger. Let me put that to the side and come back to my ropes. All right. So a braid is a beautiful loaf of bread to make and give someone. I'm going to roll these out just once more. I want them to be as close to the same size as I can get them. There we go. So I'm going to bring them together. So here's what I'm going to do. I have my pieces lined up, and it's okay if they're not perfectly the same size. We'll fix it at the end. I'm going to take my braid and I'm going to pinch it together at the top. I'm going to put one on one side and two on the other. Now here's a quick lesson in braiding if you do not know how to do this. You are simply going to say over and over and over again to yourself in your head, I want to go from the outside in, outside in. So here's my one piece, here are my two pieces. I take my outside piece, I'm going to go up and over, now it's inside. My new outside piece, up and over and inside. Outside, inside. And just keep going. Take your time. You want your loaf to be the same width all the way down, so don't pull on these too much. And just keep going. If they come out the same length at the end, great. If they don't, just cheat. And just stretch it to kind of fix it a little bit. Pinch those together there, tuck it under, and then I sometimes come back and just kind of straighten up the end. Just like that. Looks great. I'm going to take my baking sheet, pick this up. It's going to go right next to my loaf. Both of these are going to be covered. Both are going to let to sit in a quiet space for 30 minutes. They'll get a little bit puffy, and then they'll be ready to put in the oven. I'll see you then. So it's been 30 minutes. We're going to come back and look at our shaped loaves. We can see that even in that short time, they've risen that second time. They've had a second rise. They're a little bit bigger and a little bit puffier than they were. Right before I put these in the oven, there's something I'm going to do to my basic loaf that I don't need to do to my braid. I'm going to slash the top of my loaf. So I'm going to take a knife. I think a bread knife works well. This is something you can have a grown-up do. And you're just going to cut across the top 3 slashes, a good 1/4 inch down. Now, when this goes into the oven, your bread is going to expand while baking. By putting these slashes here, it's going to help hold the shape of your bread. So these are all set to go into the oven. When they come out of the oven, they're going to look like this. There's a couple of ways that you know that your bread is done. One is it's going to have a nice brown look to it. Another way is that when you take it and you thump the bottom, you should hear that nice thump for your loaf. The best way to tell that your bread is done is to use a kitchen thermometer and take the temperature. And you want the internal temperature of your bread to be at about 190 degrees. Now, these are going to be beautiful to share with someone. But before I put them in my bag, I need to make sure that they have cooled off completely. Because if I put this loaf even a little bit warm into my plastic bag, the warmth is going to give off a little bit of steam. That steam is going to condense and it's going to make my bread soggy. So I'm going to make sure it's cooled off all the way, put it in my bag, tie it up, and now it's ready for me to share. So I hope you enjoy making this recipe. You can find more recipes and tips on our website, kingarthurbaking.com. I'm Amy, and thank you for baking with me.